Today, I'd like to talk about how we can avoid being deceived by the Antichrist. Because the Bible says the deception will be so strong that even the elect might be deceived. So it says here, Matthew chapter 24, verse 24. For false Christs and false prophets will arise and perform great signs and wonders, so as to lead astray, if possible, even the elect. So even those Christians who are elect by God to be saved, they can be even deceived. So the Great Tribulation is not just about persecution, so that so many Christians will lose their salvation, but the Great Tribulation will be a huge deception. So a lot of people will actually believe that the Antichrist is Jesus. So how can we avoid being deceived by the Antichrist? So I'm going to tell you a few principles, and if you take a firm hold of these principles, regardless of what might happen at that time, there will be so many confusions and so many defections by Christians. Even if the majority of Christian churches believe the Antichrist as Jesus, if you hold on to these principles and do not sway, then you can avoid being deceived by the Antichrist. So I'm going to tell you those principles. And the first one is, Jesus will not be born again as a human. So there are a lot of Christians, especially the Catholics, they believe that Jesus will be born again as a human baby. So some people actually saw a movie, and in that movie, Jesus was born again as a baby. But Jesus will never be born again as a baby. When he returns, he will return on the cloud with great glory. So before that happens, no matter who says he is Jesus, if he is just a mere human who was born on the earth, then he's not Jesus. He's an Antichrist. So that's the first principle. And the second principle is, Jesus will return on the cloud with great glory, and with angels, and everyone will witness his second coming. So when Jesus returns, he will return on the cloud with great glory and with angels, so that everyone on the earth will be able to see his second coming. So he says, everyone will witness his second coming. These days, a lot of Christians who believe in pre-tribulation rapture, they believe that Christians will just vanish, and the people on the earth, they will not see Jesus is coming, and they won't understand what happened. So they are talking about some kind of secretive return of Jesus. But if you believe that, then there might be a danger that if somebody whose birth is not very clear and shrouded in mystery, if somebody like that comes along and says, I'm Jesus, and say, I'm the Jesus who returned secretively, and if that happens, then somebody who believes the secretive return of Jesus, then they might be deceived. So when Jesus returns, everyone will be able to see him. So until you see Jesus returns on the cloud in the sky with great glory with his angels, until that happens, no matter what happens, doesn't matter whoever claims he's Jesus, don't believe him. So Jesus said, or Jesus is in the desert, or he's in the room here. Do not believe him, because Jesus will not return as a human. So until Jesus returns on the cloud, so that everybody will be able to see him, until that happens, believe no one. So that's the second principle. And if you even just believe those two principles firmly, no matter what happens, then you can avoid being deceived by the Antichrist. And the third one is, there will be a rapture of saints at the second coming, and the raptured saints will have a wedding banquet in heaven. So when Jesus returns, he will return on the cloud, and the rapture will happen. So when he returns, if you're saved, then your body should start rising toward Jesus, toward the sky. And until that happens, believe no one. So these days, a lot of Christians, especially who believe in post-tribulation rapture, they believe that Jesus will return in the Armageddon war. And they say return of Jesus will happen only one time. And he will return to the earth, not to the sky, but actually he will descend down onto the earth in the Armageddon war. And some doesn't even believe in the rapture. And I heard a pastor preaching that there will be a rapture, but it's just a greeting Jesus in the sky. So there'll be a rapture, but we'll be just lifted to the sky for a moment to greet Jesus in the air, and we will come back down right after with Jesus onto the earth. So a lot of Christians who doesn't believe in the rapture, and a lot of Christians, they interpret the book of Revelation and the Bible very figuratively, and they don't interpret it literally, so they apply symbolism when they interpret the book of Revelation. So when they read verses that describe Jesus' return on the cloud or on the white horse, they interpret it symbolically. So actually what happened with me was that I attended a Bible study, and in that Bible study the pastor asked the question, how do you believe Jesus will return? And I answered, Jesus will return on the cloud. And then everybody just around me laughed when I said that. So they don't believe Jesus will return on the cloud. And the pastor's answer was that Jesus returning on the cloud, that just symbolically means that Jesus will return with great glory. So they don't actually believe that Jesus will return in the sky on the cloud. So when they believe that and they don't believe in the rapture, then if the Antichrist comes along and proclaim himself to be Jesus, and he will be accepted by many with great glory, then those who don't believe in the rapture or who interpreted Jesus' return symbolically, they might be deceived by the Antichrist. So when Jesus returns, he will return on the cloud, and at that time there will be a rapture. So a lot of people, they believe Jesus will return only one time, but actually in the previous videos I talked about Jesus' descent on Jerusalem, but if you take it as a Jesus' return, then that's no problem as well, because when Jesus returns on the cloud, he will go back to the kingdom of heaven with raptured saints to have a wedding banquet. And then from heaven, he will come back down onto the earth. So you can actually say that Jesus will return two times. So once on the cloud in the sky, that's the first return of Jesus. And the second return of Jesus will be in the Armageddon war, and he will return on the white horse, and he will descend onto Jerusalem. So you shouldn't be confused with those two return of Jesus. Some people even believe that when the rapture happens, we will not go to the kingdom of heaven. We'll just come back down right away to Jerusalem. But actually, when the rapture happens, we will go to the kingdom of heaven to have a wedding banquet. Because it says, Revelation chapter 7 verse 9, after this I looked, and behold, a great multitude that no one could number, from every nation, from all tribes and peoples and languages, standing before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed in white robes, with palm branches in their hands. So in the chapter 7, at the beginning, I explained in the previous videos that we see people being sealed on the foreheads, and they seal the people on the foreheads to mark the people who will be raptured. And actually in the chapter 7, that event of rapture is not described, and it skips to this scene here, verse 9. Those people from all tribes and nations, they stand before the throne of God to worship him. And who are these people? It says, these are the ones coming out of the great tribulation, and they are before the throne of God. So these are the people who are raptured, and they will be standing before the throne of God. So we can see that actually when rapture happens, we will go to the kingdom of heaven with Jesus, and we'll be standing before the throne, and we will have a banquet. So at the time of Jesus' return, there will be a rapture, and then we will go to the kingdom of heaven to have a wedding banquet. So that's the third principle. And the fourth principle is there won't be the redemption of Israel at the second coming. So a lot of people believe that Jewish redemption will happen at the time of Jesus' return because of the verse in the Bible saying, Jesus said, until the people of Israel see Jesus returning, they will be under the curse and reject Jesus. So a lot of people believe that Jewish redemption will happen at the time of Jesus' return. But actually the redemption of Israel will happen at the time of the 1,000 years kingdom. At that time, Israel will be lifted up among the nations, and everyone will look up to Israel. What Jesus meant in that verse saying Jewish people will reject Jesus until his return, he actually meant until in the end time, when Jesus returns, the Israeli people will reject Jesus. Actually, the exact timing of that happening is when they see the Antichrist proclaiming to be Jesus. Actually, Israel will accept the Antichrist as Messiah. And at that time, a lot of people will believe that redemption of Israel is happening. But when that Antichrist proclaims himself to be Jesus, then Israel will realize that Jesus was the real Messiah. And the Bible says, after that, Israel will flee to the wilderness for 3.5 years. So during Great Tribulation, Israel will flee to the wilderness. So when the Antichrist appears, it will look as if the redemption of Israel is happening, and it will look as if the prophecy in Zechariah is happening. In that prophecy, it talks about the Lord standing on the Mount Zion, and the living water will flow to the east and west. And that event will actually happen at the time of Armageddon War. Jesus will return on the white horse to Jerusalem, and he will be standing on Mount Zion, and the living water will flow to the east and west. But actually, when the Daniel 9 war happens, I explained in the previous video, in that war, there will be a flood. And at that time, the Antichrist will appear, and then he will be standing on Mount Zion, and there will be water coming out from Mount Zion. So there will be a flood. So it will look like the prophecy in Zechariah is happening. So all those who believed in Jewish redemption at the time of return of Jesus, they will be fooled and they will be deceived. So the redemption of Israel will not happen in the return of Jesus. Actually, at the time of return of Jesus, Jewish people will be raptured as well. Because in the book of Revelation chapter 7, we see the sealing of God's saints on the forehead, and Jewish people are sealed on the foreheads first. So he talks about all the tribes of Israel being sealed on the forehead. And they are sealed on the forehead to mark those people who are saved to be raptured. So actually, when Jesus returns, there won't be a redemption of Israel, but those Jewish who are saved, they will be raptured. So when the Antichrist appears, there will be a great deception, and it might look like redemption of Israel is happening. And at the time, there will be a false redemption of Israel. So those were the 4 principles. So later on there will be a great deception. People will be in so much confusion. But no matter what happens, do not be swayed. And if you take firm hold of these principles, so until Jesus returns on the cloud with great glory, so that everybody on the earth sees his coming, and at the time, if you're saved, you will be raptured up to the sky. So until that happens, no matter what happens, believe no one. So if you do that, you will not be deceived by the Antichrist.